The first gunshot shattered the night like a lightning bolt tearing through silence, and in that frozen second, every muscle in my body snapped to full alert. One moment, my disabled daughter was giggling softly at a bedtime story. The next, the window beside her exploded into a spray of glass, the sharp smell of gunpowder flooding the air. My heart slammed against my ribs as I lunged across the room, scooping her small frame into my arms, every movement powered by instinct honed from years as a SWAT commander. I could hear the hollow echo of another round being chambered outside, the metallic click slicing through the chaos as splinters of wood rained down from the doorframe. The front porch light swung wildly, casting distorted shadows that danced like threats on the wall, and my mind calculated a dozen tactical options in the blink of an eye. I shoved the dresser against the doorway, with a single shove, shielding her with my body as shards of glass crunched under my boots. Every sense sharpened, the acrid tang of cordite, the ragged edge of her frightened breathing, the low scrape of movement outside. Whoever was out there wasn't just reckless, they were deliberate. Through the shattered window, the outline of Karen's figure emerged under the moonlight, a pistol gripped tight in her shaking hands. Rage surged through me like a wildfire, but training steadied my pulse. She had no idea that the man she'd just declared war on wasn't just a father. He was a former SWAT commander ready to strike back. The days leading up to that terrifying night had been deceptively calm, a quiet rhythm of ordinary life that felt almost sacred in its simplicity. Our small home sat at the end of a leafy cul-de-sac where the air smelled of pine and freshly cut grass, and where I believed my disabled daughter could grow up surrounded by safety and love. Every morning began with the gentle hum of the coffee maker and the sound of her wheelchair softly rolling across the wooden floor as she joined me by the window to watch the sunrise. We cherished the little rituals. Her laughter when a bird hopped close to the feeder, the way she clutched my hand during evening walks, the shared triumphs of her physical therapy sessions that pushed her limits but left her glowing with pride. Neighbors would wave, the breeze carried the scent of blooming magnolias, and for a long time it seemed like life had finally granted us peace. But even in those serene moments, subtle tensions simmered at the edges. Karen, the self-appointed queen of the HOA, had a way of intruding on our calm like a dark cloud drifting across a blue sky. Her complaints began as whispers, grumbling about the wheelchair ramp, ruining the look of a neighborhood, questioning the permits for our backyard garden. But they soon turned to pointed letters, late-night knocks, and the cold stare of someone convinced she owned every inch of the cul-de-sac. I dismissed them as petty power games, choosing to focus on my daughter's joy rather than a neighbor's bitterness. Looking back, those quiet mornings now feel like a fragile dream, a brief, golden pause before the storm that would explode into violence and change everything we thought we knew about safety, community, and the lengths one woman would go to feed her hatred. It didn't take long for Karen's petty grievances to harden into open hostility, each encounter sharpening like the edge of a knife. At first, it was small but unsettling. She'd linger at the edge of our driveway, arms folded, pretending to inspect her garden while her eyes burned into our home. Then came the anonymous HOA violation notices stuffed under my door, claims that our wheelchair ramp violated community aesthetics, that the therapy van parked outside was unsightly, each word a calculated jab meant to isolate and intimidate. When I tried to reason with her in person, she smiled with a thin, cold politeness that barely concealed the contempt beneath. Rules are rules, she'd say, her voice sugary and sharp, and everyone must comply, even you. Soon she escalated beyond letters and stares. One evening as I wheeled my daughter back from the community playground, we found a crudely written sign taped to our door. "This isn't a hospital. Take your problems elsewhere." My blood ran cold. But I chose measured restraint, documenting each incident and quietly reinforcing security around the house. Yet every defensive step I took only seemed to fuel her rage. Karen began knocking at odd hours, demanding access to inspect our property, threatening HOA fines that didn't exist, and even standing in the street shouting about bringing the neighborhood back to order. Neighbors whispered their unease, some too afraid to challenge her iron grip on the HOA, others secretly slipping me warnings of things they'd overheard, plans, rumors, a growing obsession with us. I could feel the atmosphere thickening, every sunset cloaked in attention, so heavy it made the air itself feel hostile. What I didn't know was that Karen's obsession was tipping toward something far more dangerous than harassment. Every glare, every late night pounding on the door was only a prelude to the night. She would cross an unthinkable line and turn her vendetta into a violent attack that would test every ounce of my training and every instinct I had as both a father and a former SWAT commander. The night it finally erupted began with a strange stillness that set my nerves on edge long before the first gunshot. A heavy, unnatural quiet wrapped around our house, broken only by the occasional creak of settling wood and the soft hum of my daughter's breathing as she drifted into sleep. I was double-checking the locks, an old habit from years of tactical work, when the faint crunch of gravel outside snapped my attention toward the front yard. Peering through the side window, I caught a shadow slipping along the hedge, too deliberate to be a wandering animal, too slow to be a passing neighbor. My pulse tightened, instincts firing like a switch. I reached for the secure cabinet and drew my sidearm, every motion automatic, silent, precise. A sudden metallic scrape echoed from the porch, followed by the low murmur of a voice I knew all too well, Karen's. Her words, slurred by either rage or drink, hissed through the cold air, accusations about ruining the neighborhood, promises to end this tonight. Before I could call out a warning, a flash of silver under the porch light betrayed the unmistakable shape of a pistol. My training took over. I scooped my daughter from her bed, her confused whimper barely a breath, and dove behind the heavy oak dresser as the first shot shattered the living room window, spraying glass like icy shrapnel across the floor. The acrid smell of gunpowder surged into the room, stinging my eyes and sharpening my focus. I calculated every angle, the trajectory of the bullet, the time between her movements, the safest path to the reinforced panic alcove I'd built years ago. Another shot cracked, splintering the doorframe inches from where we'd crouched moments earlier. My daughter clung to me, trembling as I steadied my breathing, mind locked in the calm, lethal clarity that only years of SWAT operations could forge. Karen wasn't just knocking anymore, she had come to kill, and I knew that the next seconds would decide whether we lived or died. The chaos after those first deafening blasts felt endless, but in reality, only heartbeats passed before the next stage of the nightmare unfolded. The house reeked of cordite and shattered wood, each inhale sharp enough to burn. My daughter clung to me, her small fingers digging into my arm as if sheer could keep the bullets out. I whispered steady reassurances, but my mind worked like a precision clock, scanning every sound, the faint scrape of boots circling the porch, the sharp metallic slide of a gun being racked again. From the muffled distance of the street came startled voices, then silence, as if the entire neighborhood held its breath. I shifted us toward the reinforced alcove I had designed years ago, every motion deliberate and noiseless. Adrenaline slowed the world to frames. The creak of a floorboard beneath my weight, the glint of moonlight off the pistol in my hand, the soft gasp of my daughter as a third shot slammed into the outer wall with a violent thud. The drywall split, raining white dust across the dark floor like ash. Rage threatened to overtake reason, but I forced it down, focusing on survival and strategy. My training whispered options, angles of return fire, escape vectors through the side entry, but my priority was her heartbeat against my chest. Outside, Karen's voice rose, jagged with fury and panic, hurling accusations about taking back the neighborhood and making us pay. Then came a sudden pause, a silence more chilling than the gunfire, followed by the slow crunch of footsteps heading toward the back entrance. I knew then this wasn't a random barrage. She was hunting, methodical, and intent. Every instinct told me the next move would define everything, stay hidden and risk being cornered, or take control before she found another way in. In that breathless moment, father and former SWAT commander merged into one unyielding purpose, and the threat: protect my child and make sure Karen's rampage stopped before another life-changing shot was fired. I turned every ounce of anger into deliberate calculation, because rage is useful only when it's shaped into action that keeps my daughter safe and brings the truth into the light. First, I built an evidence timeline. Every knock, every letter, every late-night shout, every anonymous notice, dated, photographed, and backed up in 3 places so nothing could be forgotten or dismissed as he said she said. I installed discrete cameras on the eaves and a smart doorbell with cloud recording, orienting lenses to capture the driveway, porch, and the stretch of sidewalk where Karen liked to loiter, but I was careful to keep every device visible enough that it looked like normal home security rather than secret spying, because legality and optics mattered as much as footage. I logged every interaction in a single notebook: time, words spoken, tone, witnesses, and I taught myself to record calmly, not for theatrical effect, but so a judge or a detective could read the cadence of harassment and see a pattern. Next, I lined up the legal scaffolding: an experienced civil attorney who handled HOA disputes, and a criminal lawyer who would consult on escalation points, and together we built the paper trail that would make the violence unmistakable if it happened again. Certified letters, formal complaints to the HOA board with requests for minutes and bylaws, and requests for all communications that mentioned our household, each delivered with proof of receipt. I met privately with 2 neighbors who'd grown tired of Karen's theatrics and asked them to let me know the moment she showed up at odd hours. They agreed to be my eyes and, if necessary, to serve as neutral witnesses. We set up a neighborhood watch message thread strictly for reporting. No commentary, just time-stamped observations, so when something happened the record would be immediate and corroborated. Tactically, I prepared nonviolent deterrence and safe contingencies rather than seeking revenge. Reinforced locks, motion lights that announced our awareness, a safe room stocked with essentials and a hardline phone, and rehearsed exit paths with my daughter, so she would know how to move without panic. Every rehearsal was gentle and reassuring, because training a child is not about fear, but about giving her the confidence to trust my decisions in a crisis. Knowing that public exposure often forces institutions to act, I quietly compiled a public dossier, clean, factual, and verifiable, of HOA irregularities I'd uncovered while digging through public filings: improper vote counts, missing notice of meetings, selective enforcement of rules, connections between certain board members, and a property management company. I prepared an email to a local community reporter and a short, verifiable packet to offer to a reputable local TV station should the situation deteriorate, not to sensationalize our plight, but to create external accountability for a board that had grown too. Comfortable policing private lives. Crucial to the plan was bait that stayed within legal bounds. Instead of trying to entrap anyone, I created a situation designed to reveal intent without provoking a crime. I filed an official request for the HOA to inspect the ramp and garden under the public records law, and I scheduled the visit for a weekday with several neighbors present and cameras rolling. The goal was simple: if Karen objected, she would do so publicly in front of witnesses and recorded evidence. If she escalated beyond speech, the record would show premeditation. I also set clear boundaries for interacting with law enforcement. No improvisation. Because my years on missions taught me that evidence plus procedure equals leverage, I prepared an evidence folder for the responding officer with copies of the harassment log, the certified letters, video timestamps, and a concise summary of what we'd observed so officers arriving in the field could take immediate, informed action instead of treating the incident as an ambiguous neighbor dispute. Psychologically, I gamed out every possible response, so I wouldn't be surprised. What if Karen brought company? What if she recorded us? What if she denied everything? So I practiced calm statements and refusal phrases I could use on camera that would avoid accusations while still documenting hostility. I coordinated with my attorney to file for a temporary protective order the moment there was a credible threat, and we drafted the affidavit together so it could be filed within hours of any escalation. To protect my daughter's dignity, I kept her out of public documentation as much as possible. No intimate details, no medical minutiae, just the factual reality that she uses a wheelchair and that the ramp is a lawful accommodation, because our aim was justice and safety, not sympathy. Finally, I rehearsed the reveal: a scheduled HOA inspection on a Wednesday afternoon with 2 neighbor witnesses, visible cameras, a prearranged call to the local police with our evidence folder open, and a press-ready packet I would hand to a reporter if anything unlawful occurred. This was not vengeance. It was a methodical dismantling of a narrative that had protected a bully for too long, a plan built from patience, paperwork, technology, community, and the discipline of a man who had spent years preparing for chaos so he could prevent it. The day everything collapsed for Karen began like any other, but the atmosphere hummed with a quiet inevitability I'd built into the plan. Neighbors who'd once avoided eye contact now stood with me on the sidewalk, phones discreetly recording, their faces set with a hard, steady resolve that felt like armor. The HOA inspector arrived with his clipboard as scheduled. The cameras captured every step, and I watched Karen approach with that same brittle smile that had once hidden a venomous will. She started with the familiar litany of complaints, loud and performative, expecting to bully us into silence, but her script began to fray the second the first video clip played back on my tablet. Timestamps matched the dates in my log, her late-night threats were corroborated by neighbor testimonies, and the security footage showed her pacing the porch the night of the shots, her silhouette unmistakable. When I handed the inspector and a responding officer the compiled packet, certified, letters, recorded threats, eyewitness statements, and conservatively redacted footage, Karen's color drained in real time. She stammered denials that fell flat against the cold clarity of recorded evidence, and the neighborhood that had once turned its head now watched as the veneer of her authority cracked. Rather than a single dramatic confession, her downfall was a slow unspooling. Board members shifted uncomfortably when shown meeting minutes, proving they'd rubber-stamped selective. Enforcement, a property manager's cozy relationship with Karen emerged in email threads. The inspector informed the HOA president that several bylaws had been misapplied and that the county would review the community's processes if corrective action wasn't taken immediately. As word spread, a local reporter I'd quietly briefed arrived and, with professional restraint, asked pointed questions that let the facts speak louder than accusation, and the tape that had once been the bulwark of my private defense became public proof that a bully had weaponized the very systems meant to protect neighbors. Karen's theatrics turned desperate. She attempted to interrupt, lobbed accusations at anyone who stepped forward, and even tried to claim the footage had been doctored. But the forensic timestamps, the corroborating neighbors, and the attorney's swift filing left her with nowhere to stand. Within hours, she was served with a temporary restraining order, a notice that an internal HOA review had suspended her privileges, and a criminal investigation was opened into the intimidation and the shooting incident. Neighbors who had feared retribution now stepped into the light to give statements, their voices steady, their memories precise, and their willingness to stand together transformed fear into civic power. Watching her escorted away by officers, the humiliation on her face was not the triumph I sought. This was accountability, a long overdue alignment of truth and consequence, and while I felt a hollow satisfaction, it was tempered by the cost. The trauma etched into my daughter's silence, the betrayal of a community that allowed one person to wield fear as authority, and the knowledge that vindication in court would still require endurance. Even so, the moment the handcuffs clicked shut felt like the first audible step toward a different kind of safety, one engineered not by a single man's training, but by the collective courage of neighbors, the precise work of documentation, and a relentless refusal to let intimidation become the normal rhythm of our lives. In the weeks that followed Karen's arrest, the neighborhood transformed from a place of silent tension into one of quiet rebuilding, and the weight that had pressed on every sunset finally began to lift. My daughter slowly reclaimed her sense of safety, first by daring to sit near the once shattered window, then by laughing again during our morning coffee ritual, her voice carrying through the house like a long-awaited melody. The HOA, forced into transparency, held an emergency meeting under the watchful eyes of county officials and a local reporter, and every bylaw that Karen had twisted to her advantage was re-examined and rewritten with firm safeguards against abuse. Neighbors who had once kept their distance began dropping by with food and words of apology, admitting that fear had kept them silent. Now, united by the evidence and by a shared understanding of how fragile community trust can be, they offered help to repair windows, repaint siding, and even set up a rotating evening watch to keep everyone safe. The investigation moved forward methodically, Ballistic tests linked the recovered shell casings to the weapon found in Karen's home, digital forensics confirmed the threatening messages, and the district attorney prepared a strong case for aggravated assault and reckless endangerment. Yet I refused to let the legal process be the story's only ending. Instead, I used the attention to build something lasting, a neighborhood safety initiative that trained residents in de-escalation and documented home security best practices, turning the very tactics I'd once used in SWAT operations into tools for civilian resilience. When the case finally went to court, the verdict of guilty on all major charges felt less like a personal victory than a communal restoration. The judge's words about accountability echoed, not just in the courtroom, but across every porch and driveway that had once been shadowed by Karen's intimidation. As I stood with my daughter outside our repaired front door, the crisp evening air no longer heavy with dread, I realized that our survival had been more than a single night's courage. It was the outcome of patience, preparation, and a neighborhood that rediscovered its backbone. Before stepping inside, I filmed a short message for the many viewers who had followed our journey, urging them to stay vigilant in their own communities and to never underestimate the strength of unity and careful planning. Then I invited them to subscribe for more real stories of justice and resilience, not for fame, but to remind anyone watching that courage shared is courage multiplied, and that even in the darkest nights, a steadfast commitment to truth can light a path to safety and renewal. With Karen gone and the gavel of justice delivered, life began to settle into a rhythm that finally resembled peace, yet the scars of the ordeal remained as reminders of how close we had come to losing everything. My daughter, though still shaken, found new confidence in the strength she had witnessed, no longer just her father, but a protector who had stood between her and chaos. And she carried that resilience into her therapy, pushing herself further with each session, determined to prove that fear would not define her. The neighborhood, once fractured by silence and intimidation, flourished under a newfound sense of solidarity. Barbecues returned to the cul-de-sac, neighbors exchanged greetings without hesitation, and children played outside without glancing nervously at every passing shadow. I poured my energy into strengthening that unity, organizing monthly safety briefings, teaching situational awareness, and quietly mentoring those who wanted to feel more in control of their lives. The story of our fight spread beyond the neighborhood, carried by local news and amplified by online communities hungry for proof that ordinary people could push back against bullies hiding behind authority. Messages flooded in from across the country, veterans thanking me for showing how training could save lives, even off the battlefield, parents of disabled children sharing their own battles with discrimination, and strangers offering prayers and encouragement. It became clear that this wasn't just my family's ordeal, it was a mirror for countless others who had faced their own Karens, their own unjust systems, their own silent fears. So, as I closed that chapter with my daughter by my side, I left viewers with one final truth. Darkness thrives when good people stay quiet, but even one voice backed by preparation, courage, and unwavering love can ignite change that spreads far beyond a single cul-de-sac. And with that, I invited them to join our journey, to subscribe not just for another story, but for a movement, because together we can turn every act of intimidation into a story of resilience and every attempt at control into a moment of reckoning. That final message struck deeper than I imagined, turning what had begun as a personal nightmare into a story that reached millions who had lived through their own battles with bullies, corrupt boards, or unchecked authority, and it became a spark for something greater than just views or headlines. My inbox overflowed with stories of people who had been silenced for years, who now felt encouraged to stand up, document, and demand accountability, and as I read through them with my daughter sitting beside me, I realized that sharing our ordeal had become a form of healing, not just for us, but for an unseen community of survivors. The channel grew, not because of sensationalism, but because people craved the reminder that justice, though slow and painful, was possible when approached with persistence and strategy. Every new subscriber wasn't just a number, it was a witness, a supporter, someone who carried forward the lesson that silence enables cruelty. In our neighborhood, life returned not just to normal, but to something stronger. The HOA was reshaped with fair-minded leadership, bylaws were rewritten with protections for the vulnerable, and the culture of fear evaporated under the weight of transparency. My daughter's laughter filled the house again, unshadowed by dread. And on evenings when we watched the sun sink behind the rooftops, I felt a peace I hadn't believed we would ever regain. Looking back, Karen's downfall was never about revenge. It was about drawing a line no one should ever have to cross, proving that even in the face of intimidation and violence, preparation, courage, and truth could dismantle the darkest of threats. And so I closed our story not with anger, but with resolve, reminding every viewer: stand firm, protect what matters, and never underestimate the power of a united community and a prepared heart, because that combination can topple even the most entrenched bully. The story of Karen's rampage could have ended with blood, fear, and silence, but instead it ended with justice, strength, and a neighborhood reborn. The cameras captured her downfall, the court delivered accountability, and the walls that once echoed with gunfire now ring with my daughter's laughter again. But don't mistake this as just one family survival story. It's proof that bullies only thrive when good people stay quiet, and that even the most relentless intimidation collapses when met with discipline, evidence, and unshakable courage. I was a SWAT commander once, trained to face chaos head-on, but it wasn't just my training that stopped Karen. It was the power of neighbors uniting, the law finally doing its job, and the refusal to let fear dictate our lives. And here's the shocking truth I've saved until now. When investigators dug deeper, they uncovered that Karen had siphoned HOA funds for years, covering her vendetta with layers of corruption that would have gone unnoticed had she not escalated into violence. Her obsession didn't just destroy her credibility, it exposed a web of fraud that is still unraveling to this day. That's the real legacy of her downfall, not the terror she spread, but the light her actions accidentally shone on corruption that might have continued unchecked. So, if you've ever been harassed by an HOA tyrant, bullied by someone hiding behind authority, or made to feel small in your own home, know this: you're not alone and you don't have to stay silent. Stand firm, document everything, and believe that justice can prevail. And if you want to hear more true stories of people who turned intimidation into victory, subscribe now and join this community of resilience. Because together, we're proving that no matter how dark the night, courage and truth will always write the final chapter.